They laughed at Keanu Reeves at the royal Easter banquet. Some people whispered that he didn't belong. Others laughed at his plain black suit. They looked at him like he didn't belong there. But just when someone tried to make him leave, King Charles stood up from his seat. He called out Keanu's name. And then he said something that made everyone in the room go quiet. Before we begin, comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel. The sunlight came softly through the big, colorful windows of Durham Cathedral. It made pretty rainbow patterns on the shiny floor. Outside, Easter lilies were swaying in the wind, their white flowers glowing in the light. But inside the old stone courtyard, something special was about to happen. This wasn't the main Easter church service that had ended hours ago with songs, prayers, and people bowing their heads. This was the royal Easter banquet. Only special guests were allowed to come. These guests were important people. Kings and queens, helpers of the poor, and rich people who gave money to help others. Even the spoons and forks here were super fancy. Into this very special party walked Keanu Reeves. He was wearing all black. Not a tuxedo. Not a fancy coat. Just a simple black suit. No tie. No shiny buttons. No fancy pins. There was a bit of dust on his pants, like maybe he had walked from the train station to the party. No one came to greet him. No helpers followed him. No cameras took his picture. He walked alone, quiet and calm, like someone who is used to being unnoticed. When Keanu walked into the courtyard, only a few people even looked up. They just glanced at him for a second and then looked away. They didn't recognize him. Or maybe they did and thought he didn't belong. Keanu stopped by a long wooden table. On it were paintings made by children from the Hope Bridge program, kids who didn't have homes or families. The paintings were sweet and messy, full of bright colors and big dreams. He looked closely at one painting of a girl holding a red umbrella in the rain. He smiled. That's when Serafina Vale saw him. Serafina was very fancy. She wore shiny pearls and spoke in a bossy voice. She was the leader of the Royal Banquet Committee for 3 years. Every flower, every sip of juice, and every guest had to go through her. But Keanu hadn't. She turned to her helper and whispered, "Who let him in?" The helper looked at her list. "He's on the guest list, ma'am. He came early." Serafina frowned. "Where's his badge?" "I don't think he has one," the helper said. Serafina's frown got tighter. "Then he shouldn't be in this part of the courtyard. He belongs in the other area." "Should I?" "No. I'll take care of it." Serafina walked over in her shiny dress. Her skirt made a soft swish sound, like a warning bell. Keanu didn't move. He knew she was coming, but he kept looking at the kids' paintings, like they were the most important things there. When Serafina reached him, she gave a smile that only looked nice if you were far away. "Excuse me, sir," she said sweetly but sharply. "This area is only for our honored guests. Could you please show your invitation? Or maybe go to the other courtyard?" Keanu looked at her calmly. Then he pulled out a small card from his pocket. Serafina didn't even look at it. She had already decided. He didn't belong. And she wanted everyone to know it. The golden sunlight made the glasses shine and the silver sparkle. Waiters with white gloves moved quietly, serving tiny snacks and sparkling drinks. The smell of old stone mixed with flowers and soft music. People chatted in gentle voices. Keanu stood at the edge, near a marble column. He wasn't trying to get attention. His hands were behind his back as he looked at each painting made by the children. One painting showed a yellow house with stick figure people in the garden. The sign under it said, "My Dream Home by Mira, age 9. Across the courtyard, Serafina was walking around, smiling and talking to fancy guests. She laughed softly and pointed things out like a queen. but she kept watching Keanu. "Is that the caterer?" asked Lord Theodore Blackthorne, squinting at Keanu. "I thought he was security," said Lady Isabella, fanning herself. Serafina gave a fake smile. "I believe he's a guest. Though, maybe an unexpected one. Maybe he wandered in." Lord Blackthorne laughed. "Or got lost." Serafina made sure her voice could be heard by others. Sometimes people think wearing a black suit means they fit in. She took a sip of her drink and added, "True elegance isn't about dressing up. It's about knowing your place." People chuckled quietly, just loud enough for Keanu to hear. Keanu turned his head and saw Serafina looking at him. She smiled like she was taking a picture. He didn't smile back. Someone nearby started live-streaming the event. The camera showed the shiny dresses and smiling faces. In one video frame, Keanu stood by the kid's art, hands in his pockets, ignored. A small boy bumped into him while reaching for a snack. Keanu gently helped him, smiled, and asked, "You okay?" The boy looked up, unsure if he should talk. Serafina saw that too. She leaned on her assistant. "That man doesn't understand how special this event is. Make sure he doesn't get near the king when he arrives." "Yes, Miss Vale," the assistant whispered, nervous. Serafina didn't care how it was done. She just wanted to make sure the king didn't notice the wrong man. She didn't want the cameras to catch the outsider. Then, the sound of clinking glasses told everyone that the formal part of the banquet was starting. Guests moved toward the stage where a big banner hung and a screen showed the Hope Bridge Foundation's logo, two hands holding a paper house. Keanu stayed off to the side, near an old arch where sunlight poured in. He still looked at the paintings, slow and calm. He stopped in front of one. A child had drawn a stick figure girl holding a big key. The sign under it read, "My Forever Home." Then he heard heels clicking on the stone. "Sir," said a sweet but mean voice. He turned. Serafina Vale was there again, with her young helper holding a clipboard. Serafina wore a shiny white dress with gold trim. Her face was smooth and practiced. "You're still here?" she asked with a fake smile. Keanu nodded. "Yes." The invitation said, "Until 5. Serafina blinked, then smiled tighter. "I'm sure it did. But maybe you don't know that there are different levels to this evening's party." "I'm listening," Keanu said quietly. "This part," Serafina said, waving her hand toward the stage and the musicians and the guests, "is for donors who give money publicly. You understand, right? It's about how it looks." Keanu didn't move. "So, you're saying helping in secret doesn't count?" Serafina tilted her head. "I'm saying quiet helpers should stay in quiet places. And this," she looked around the courtyard, "is not a quiet place." The assistant beside her looked uncomfortable, glancing back and forth between them. "I have a letter from the palace," Keanu said gently. Keanu slowly reached into his coat pocket, closing his hand. "No need to show papers," he said. "It's probably just a mistake on our list." Serafina, standing nearby, looked at a staff member wearing a dark vest. She signaled for him to come over. "Could you please take Mr. Reeves to the public gallery? He'll be more comfortable there." The staff member hesitated for a moment. He knew Keanu's name was on the list, but Serafina's tone made it clear she wasn't asking. Keanu nodded, then walked away. Some people in the room noticed him. One man quietly took a photo, while another whispered something behind his hand. Serafina turned back to her assistant and muttered, "What's the point of having rules if we let anyone walk around like they belong here?" The assistant didn't say anything. Across the room, a little girl in a light blue dress stood near the art table. She was holding a folded drawing and was looking at Keanu. Her eyes weren't confused or amused, but sad and a little scared. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard, the scene became even more beautiful. Waiters walked around with silver trays holding fancy food like foie gras and lemon tartlets. Guests moved toward the center of the courtyard, where a big screen showed a slideshow with soft music. The pictures were of smiling children from the Hope Bridge Foundation. Keanu stood at the far edge of the courtyard, near a fountain covered with wisteria. He didn't speak, didn't do anything. He just stood there, holding a champagne glass that he didn't drink from. In the middle of the room, Serafina Vian stood out. She looked amazing in a white and gold dress that sparkled under the chandeliers. She walked confidently across the marble floor and took the microphone from the host with a polite nod. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice perfect and smooth, "thank you all for coming today to celebrate not just Easter, but the kindness of our special guests." Everyone clapped, smiling. She kept talking, looking over at Keanu, who was standing alone. "Some people think charity is about the heart," she said, letting the words hang in the air. "Others think it's about humility. But tonight, it's about honoring those who give, not just with money, but with dignity, tradition, and class." Keanu didn't move, but his body shifted just a little. He was listening. Serafina looked toward the screen again. "Let's see the legacy we're all part of." The slideshow started again, showing black and white photos of past gala events. There were grainy pictures of old donors, wearing silk gloves and fancy dresses. Then, something unexpected happened. The camera turned to show the event happening right now. The drone camera zoomed in and focused on Keanu for a full 5 seconds. He looked almost like a shadow, standing still among all the fancy decorations. He had no special badge, no big group around him. Just a quiet man in a black suit, standing by himself. People in the room noticed the change. You could feel it, little coughs, shuffling feet, and people checking their phones like they didn't want to look at him. Then, someone whispered loudly enough for others to hear. Lady Isabella, sitting near the front, leaned toward her husband and said, "Poor man, he probably just wandered in from the street." A few people nearby laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. Serafina smiled, but her eyes were cold. "We must be careful not to let the wrong faces change what this event is about," she said calmly. Then, a small voice cut through the quiet. A child, standing by the art table, suddenly spoke out. Serafina's voice became sharp again. "We need to keep things in order," she said. "This is a formal event. We can't let people just walk around and make it messy." Keanu didn't say anything. He didn't blink, but his fingers tapped lightly on his glass. He wasn't here for attention, but now everyone was watching him and getting the story wrong. For a moment, things seemed to freeze. The whispers got softer, but you could tell something had changed. People started looking toward Keanu again, but no one came over to talk to him. He was standing alone, a quiet shadow in the middle of a room full of busy people. Then, from the side of the room, a little girl in a light blue dress appeared. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old. She walked carefully toward the table where her name tag, Mira, was displayed. No one stopped her. No one noticed her except for Keanu. Mira walked right up to him with a big, certain smile on her face. "You came," she said. Keanu crouched down to be at her eye level. "Of course," he said. Mira held out a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing of a house with a red door, 2 stick figures, and a big sun. In block letters below the picture, it said, "Thank you, Mr. K, you gave me my home." Mira then threw her arms around him, not for show or because anyone told her to, but just because she was thankful. Across the courtyard, Serafina saw it and didn't like it. Her face became hard as ice. She started walking toward them, her heels clicking on the stone floor. People moved aside as she came closer. "Excuse me," Serafina said, speaking to Mira. "I think you're a little confused, sweetheart." Mira looked up at Serafina, surprised. "I just wanted to thank him," she said. Serafina interrupted in a soft, almost gentle voice, but still with a warning tone. "Yes, but this is a formal event. We can't interrupt important moments like this, can we?" Keanu stood calmly, not looking at Serafina but at Mira. "She's not interrupting anything," he said quietly but firmly. Serafina turned to him, her smile returning, but it looked forced. "Mr. Reeves, while we appreciate your kindness, this part of the evening is for formal presentations. The children are welcome in the observation gallery." Keanu looked down at Mira and then back at Serafina. "You invited them here to be part of your mission, didn't you?" he asked. Serafina answered, "Yes, but not to mingle during the royal segment." Mira's lip quivered, and she looked sad. "I just wanted to say thank you." Serafina's voice softened a little, but she still kept her firmness. "You already did, dear." Keanu gently folded Mira's picture and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "She belongs here more than most of us," he said quietly. A few people near him turned to listen. For the first time that evening, something had changed. Serafina's control over the room started to slip. People could feel it, though they didn't say anything out loud. Something had shifted, not loudly, but enough to make them pay attention. Serafina straightened up, letting the silence speak for her. Then she smiled again, but it was a thin, fake smile. "Let's not let emotions get in the way of what's important," she said, her voice sweet but sharp. "We have to keep things in order." Keanu looked at Serafina. His gaze wasn't angry, but there was something in it, something colder, sharper, like a clear-cut truth. "You're right," he said softly, but his words held weight. "I've been hearing a tone here ever since I walked in." Serafina lifted her chin, looking at him like she was ready for a fight. "The tone of pretending," he continued, "of people talking about helping others, but then stepping around the ones who actually need help." The people in the crowd, who had been murmuring quietly, suddenly went still. One person stopped mid-sip of champagne, eyes widening. Another guest subtly moved their phone, adjusting it to get a better angle. Serafina's nostrils flared, her lips pressing tightly together, but she kept her voice calm and polished as always. "Mr. Reeves, I suggest you be careful with your words," she said, her voice cool but sharp. "I already have," he responded, his voice even, his tone steady. "All evening, you've been trying to erase people who don't fit your perfect image. A child. A person like me." Serafina blinked, taken aback by the directness in his words. She didn't know how to respond to that. But Keanu wasn't done yet. "I didn't come here for applause," he added. "I didn't come here to walk the red carpet. I came because I believe in what Hope Bridge does. I came because I know what it's like to grow up without a place to belong." There it was. The truth was clear. The words cut through the polished facade like a sharp knife. Serafina opened her mouth to say something, but no sound came out. She couldn't find the right words. Keanu turned to Mira, who had been standing nearby, watching. "Go sit with your friends, kiddo," he said gently. "I've got this." Mira nodded and ran off, her blue dress swishing behind her as she moved quickly through the crowd. Then Serafina, her voice lowering to a dangerous level, hissed, "I think you've said enough." Keanu's voice dropped even further, quieter, but with more power in it than ever before. "No, Serafina, you said enough when you decided silence meant you were superior to everyone else." He stepped back a little, giving her space, not because he had to, but because he knew that she was about to need that space. The air around them felt heavy, like everyone in the room was holding their breath. Serafina stood frozen for a moment, her chest tight. She was caught between outrage and disbelief. The whole atmosphere in the room had changed. The clink of glassware had stopped. The sound of soft music from the string quartet had come to a halt. It was like the room itself was holding its breath. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Serafina couldn't let this continue. Not here. Not in front of everyone with cameras rolling. She stepped forward sharply and flicked her hand, calling over 2 staff members. "Escort Mr. Reeves out of the courtyard," she said, her voice low and urgent, but full of command. The older man, one of the staff members, hesitated. He had heard the exchange between them, and he knew exactly who had stood with Grace and who hadn't. But Serafina was powerful, with her donations and political ties, and that overruled everything else. The man glanced at her, then quietly said, "Yes, ma'am," and began to approach Keanu, followed by the younger attendant. They moved toward him cautiously, like they weren't sure how to handle him, as if he were some precious object that might break. The older attendant started speaking. "Sir," he said gently, "we've been asked to—" "It's fine," Keanu interrupted, raising a hand in a calm gesture. "I was just about to leave." He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was calm. But under that calm was a quiet strength, one that didn't need to raise its voice. As Keanu turned to leave, a hush spread across the courtyard like the sudden pull of a tide. Everyone's eyes followed him, some with pity, some curious, others too ashamed to meet his gaze. And just when it seemed like Keanu was going to exit unnoticed, a voice rang out. "Mr. Reeves." It was Mira. She had returned, breathless and emotional, her fists clenched around the skirt of her blue dress. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him. "Please don't go," she said, her voice trembling, cracking with emotion. "This place feels different when you're here. It feels real." Keanu paused. He didn't answer her right away. He didn't need to say anything. The silence between them was full of meaning, far deeper than words. It wasn't empty, it was full of weight. The crowd felt it too. Several people in the room exchanged glances, some lowering their phones, others visibly uncomfortable. It was as if the weight of the moment had finally sunk in, and they all realized they had just witnessed something they might regret. But Serafina couldn't back down. She stepped forward again, and her voice cut through the moment, sharp and clear. "This is a royal function, not a fan club," she said, too loudly, her words ringing out in the quiet room. The words echoed around the courtyard and hit the crowd like a slap. A quiet murmur started among the guests. "Did she just say that to a child?" someone whispered. "Who is he, really? Why isn't anyone doing something about her?" The spell that Serafina had cast over the evening, the one of status, wealth, and control, began to crack. From those cracks spilled something real, something unpolished and raw. People started looking at each other, their faces confused, unsure of what to do next. Keanu had said nothing. His silence had been louder than anything else. Serafina's hold on the room was slipping. She could feel it. But she didn't know how to stop it. Keanu glanced at Mira once more, then gave a small nod. "I'll be fine," he said, his voice still gentle, reassuring her. Then, without another word, he turned and began walking toward the exit. But before he reached the large wooden doors, a new voice broke through the tension. "Stop." The voice was clear, formal, and powerful. It rang through the courtyard like the sound of a bell tolling. Every head turned. Standing at the far end, framed by the sunlight and royal crests, was King Charles III. The courtyard fell completely silent. Even the air seemed to freeze, waiting to see what would happen next. The king stood tall in his royal navy robes, a golden sash across his chest, and a pin glinting on his lapel. His eyes were sharp and focused only on Keanu, and he walked toward him without any hesitation. "Mr. Reeves," the king called, his voice calm but commanding. "Please, join me up front." Keanu stopped in his tracks. The 2 attendants who had been guiding him hesitated, unsure of what to do. The crowd was buzzing with surprise, confusion, and disbelief. Keanu turned slowly toward the king and nodded respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice quiet but respectful. King Charles descended the stairs, ignoring the gasps, the whispers, and the flashing cameras. He walked straight to Keanu and extended his hand. "Forgive me for my late arrival," the king said with a slight bow of his head. "But I would not miss the most important moment of the evening." Serafina, still standing near the podium, felt her body go stiff. Her fingers shook around the microphone. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The king turned to the crowd. "I need to correct a grave oversight," he said, his voice ringing out clearly. "A silent benefactor has contributed more to Hope Bridge than anyone else in this room could imagine. He has funded housing, scholarships, and therapy for more than 2,000 displaced children." He turned to look at Keanu, who remained quiet, letting the king's words fill the room. "This man," King Charles continued, "has done more for the children of this nation than most people do in a lifetime. And until now, few in this room even knew his name." A murmur of awe rippled through the crowd. People were stunned. The cameras that had once been pointed at champagne glasses and designer gowns were now focused on Keanu. King Charles gestured toward the stage. "Please, Mr. Reeves, stand with me," he said firmly. "Not behind the curtain, not at the edge of the room, but with me." Keanu nodded and walked beside the king. The crowd stood and began to clap. At first, the applause was soft, unsure, but then it grew louder and louder until it was undeniable. Even Serafina had no choice but to clap, her hands trembling as she did. The man she had tried to erase was now at the center of everything, not because he had sought the spotlight, but because the truth had finally found its place in the light. Keanu stood beside the king, still in his simple black suit. He didn't smile for the cameras. He didn't glance at the people who had mocked him. Instead, he gave a quiet nod to the children sitting at the side, especially to Mira, who was now smiling through her tears. King Charles raised his hand to silence the crowd. "Let tonight be a reminder," he said, "that appearances often lie, and that humility is not weakness, but wisdom." The room fell quiet. Some bowed their heads in shame, others in respect. Serafina stood still, holding onto the podium as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. The people who had once followed her every move now avoided her eyes. The spell she had woven all evening had broken. Keanu had said nothing. He had simply stood in the truth, and that was more than enough. If you liked this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.